The morning sunlight streamed through the ancient windows of Buckingham Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before a mirror that had reflected the faces of queens for over 2 centuries. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the delicate diamond earrings that once belonged to Princess Diana. Today would mark the beginning of a new chapter in British history, one that nobody had expected to write so soon. Just months ago, Catherine was planning school visits and charity galas as the future queen consort, believing she had decades to prepare for the crown. But fate had other plans. The unexpected abdication of King Charles III due to his deteriorating health had thrust William into the monarchy far earlier than anyone anticipated, making Catherine not just a princess, but a queen-in-waiting who would soon stand before the world as Britain's new royal matriarch. As she descended the grand staircase where countless monarchs had walked before her, Catherine couldn't help but think of the young woman who had once been ridiculed by the press as Waity Katy, the middle-class girl who wasn't quite royal enough for a prince. Now, that same woman was about to make history as she and William prepared for their first public appearance as the new sovereigns of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The weight of tradition pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible crown, but Catherine had learned something invaluable over her years in the royal family. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most ordinary people who refuse to let circumstance define their destiny. Today, the world would witness not just a ceremony, but the emergence of a monarchy reimagined for the modern age. Outside the palace gates, thousands of people from across the globe had gathered, their faces pressed against the iron railings, cameras ready to capture this historic moment. They had come to witness something unprecedented, the first time in British history that a commoner-born queen would stand beside a king who had inherited his crown not through death, but through the graceful transition of a father who chose to step aside for the good of the nation. What they were about to witness would challenge everything the world thought it knew about the British royal family, and set the stage for a new era that would either secure the monarchy's future or test its very survival in the 21st century. The story begins 6 months earlier, on a crisp autumn morning when King Charles III made the phone call that would change the course of British history forever. William was in his study at Adelaide Cottage, reviewing papers for his upcoming Earthshot Prize ceremony, when his private secretary knocked urgently on the door. "Sir, His Majesty is on the line. He says it's extremely urgent." William picked up the secure phone line, expecting perhaps news about a family emergency or a pressing state matter. Instead, he heard his father's voice, steady but weighed down with emotion he had rarely heard before. "William, I need you to come to Clarence House immediately. Bring Catherine. We need to discuss the future of the monarchy." The drive to Clarence House felt longer than usual, despite the police escort clearing the London traffic. Catherine sat beside him in the back of the Range Rover, her hand finding his as they both sensed that their lives were about to change dramatically. They had been through transformative moments before, their wedding, the birth of their children, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, but something in Charles's tone suggested this would be different. Clarence House stood majestically in the afternoon light as their car pulled through the gates. Charles was waiting for them in his private sitting room, the same room where he had spent countless hours over the decades preparing for the role he had finally inherited just 2 years prior. But, today, he looked older than his years, the weight of recent months visible in the lines around his eyes. "Father, what's happening?" William asked as they settled into the familiar chintz-covered chairs. Charles took a deep breath before speaking. "The doctors have given me their final assessment. The treatment isn't working as well as we hoped. My condition is progressing faster than expected, and they believe I have perhaps 18 months before I'll be unable to carry out my duties effectively." Catherine felt her heart skip. Charles had been battling cancer, but the family had been told it was manageable, that he could continue his royal duties with some adjustments. This news changed everything. "The constitutional scholars and I have been discussing options," Charles continued. "I could continue until I'm physically unable, but that would mean months of uncertainty and speculation about the monarchy's stability. Or..." He paused, looking directly at William. "I could abdicate in favor of you, ensuring a smooth transition while I'm still capable of making that decision clearly." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock that had belonged to Queen Victoria. William felt the familiar sensation of duty calling to him, but this time it came with a timeline he hadn't expected. He had always known he would be king, but he had imagined having another decade or two to prepare, to watch his children grow up away from the intense scrutiny that comes with being the heir apparent. When would this happen? Catherine asked quietly, her practical nature cutting through the emotional weight of the moment. "If we proceed, I would like to make the announcement at Christmas, with the formal abdication taking place in March. That would give us time to prepare the transition properly and allow the public to adjust to the idea." William looked at Catherine, seeing in her eyes the same mixture of determination and trepidation he felt. They had spent 13 years as working royals, gradually taking on more responsibilities, building their own charitable initiatives, and learning the delicate balance between public service and private family life. But this would thrust them into the very center of the monarchy far sooner than anticipated. "We need time to think about this," William said finally. "Of course. But, William, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about my health. The monarchy needs fresh energy, a new perspective for the challenges ahead. The world is changing rapidly, and I believe you and Catherine are better positioned to lead the royal family through the next phase of its evolution." That evening, William and Catherine sat in their garden at Adelaide Cottage, watching their children play on the swing set Prince Philip had installed years earlier. George, now 11, was pushing Charlotte on the swing while Louis chased their dog around the lawn. It was a picture of domestic normalcy that belied the enormous decision weighing on their minds. "Are we ready for this?" Catherine asked, voicing the question they were both thinking. "I don't think anyone can ever be truly ready to be king and queen," William replied. "But we've been preparing our whole lives, even when we didn't realize it." Catherine thought about her journey from a middle-class family in Berkshire to this moment. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had built a successful party supply business from their kitchen table, teaching her the value of hard work and determination. She had never imagined, even during her university years at St. Andrews where she met William, that she would one day face the prospect of being queen. The media scrutiny during their courtship had been intense. She remembered the photographers camped outside her flat, the tabloid headlines questioning whether she was suitable for a prince, the pressure to be perfect in every public appearance. But she had also seen how William handled that pressure, how he protected their relationship while honoring his royal duties. "The children," William said, echoing her thoughts. "George is still so young to become heir apparent." They had worked hard to give their children as normal a childhood as possible. George attended Lambrook School with his siblings, played football with his classmates, and had friends who treated him as just another boy named George. Becoming the heir apparent would change that dynamic significantly. "We'll protect them," Catherine said firmly. "Just like your mother tried to protect you and Harry. We'll find a way to let them be children while preparing them for their roles." Over the following weeks, they met with constitutional experts, palace officials, and trusted advisors. The logistics of an abdication were complex. It hadn't happened in British history since Edward VIII in 1936, and that had been under very different circumstances. Charles's abdication would be portrayed as a graceful transition, a king putting the needs of the monarchy above personal considerations. The security briefings were sobering. As monarch and consort, their protection requirements would increase dramatically. Their children's security would also be elevated. The family's freedom of movement, already limited, would become even more constrained. But there were also exciting possibilities. As king and queen, William and Catherine would have unprecedented influence to address the causes they cared about deeply. William's passion for environmental conservation and Catherine's work with early childhood development could reach new heights with the platform of the crown. They spent long evenings discussing how they would approach their new roles. William wanted to continue the modernization efforts his grandmother Elizabeth II had begun and, his father had advanced, making the monarchy more accessible and relevant to contemporary Britain. Catherine was determined to use her position to address social issues, particularly around mental health and family support systems. The decision, when it finally came, felt inevitable. On a snowy December evening, they sat with Charles and Camilla in the same sitting room where this journey had begun. "We're ready," William said simply. Charles nodded, relief visible on his face. "I know this isn't the timeline any of us expected, but I believe you'll be extraordinary monarchs." The announcement was made on Christmas Day, after the traditional church service at Sandringham. Charles spoke to the nation from his study, explaining his decision with characteristic dignity and grace. He praised William and Catherine's dedication to public service and expressed his confidence in their ability to lead the monarchy into the future. The public reaction was mixed but largely supportive. Many understood the reasoning behind Charles's decision and respected his choice to prioritize the stability of the institution over his personal desire to continue as king. Others worried about William and Catherine's relative youth and inexperience in the most senior royal roles. The international media was captivated by the story. Here was a monarchy voluntarily transitioning power, a king choosing to step aside for the good of the institution, and a future queen who embodied a modern approach to royal duty. The world watched with fascination as Britain prepared for its newest monarchs. In the months leading up to the abdication, William and Catherine threw themselves into preparation. They met with Commonwealth leaders, studied constitutional law, and worked with palace staff to understand the intricate protocols of kingship. Catherine spent hours with Charles's private secretary, learning about the hundreds of charities and organizations that looked to the monarch for support. They also had difficult conversations with their children. George, as the new heir apparent, would need to understand his future responsibilities while still being allowed to enjoy his childhood. Charlotte and Louis would also face increased scrutiny as the children of reigning monarchs rather than future monarchs. The night before the abdication ceremony, Catherine stood in the same room where she had prepared for her wedding 13 years earlier. This time, instead of a wedding dress, she was being fitted for the outfit she would wear to become queen. The weight of history surrounded her, but so did a sense of purpose that had been building throughout her years in the royal family. Tomorrow, she and William would step into roles that would define not just their own lives, but the future of an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. They were ready to write the next chapter of that history, together. The morning of March 15 dawned grey and drizzly, typical London weather that seemed to match the solemnity of the day ahead. Inside Westminster Abbey, the same ancient stones that had witnessed coronations for nearly 1,000 years would today witness something unprecedented in modern British history, a reigning monarch voluntarily passing the crown to his heir. Catherine woke before dawn, her mind immediately racing through the events that lay ahead. Beside her, William was already awake, staring at the ceiling of their bedroom at Clarence House, where they had spent their final night as the Prince and Princess of Wales. "How are you feeling?" she whispered. "Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane without knowing if the parachute will work," he replied, managing a smile despite the gravity of the moment. The palace staff had been awake for hours, coordinating the complex logistics of the day. This wasn't a coronation, that would come later, but rather an abdication ceremony followed immediately by William's accession. Constitutional experts had worked for months to create a protocol that honored tradition while acknowledging the unique circumstances. Charles had insisted that the ceremony be dignified but not overly elaborate. "This is about continuity and stability," he had told the planning committee. "Not about spectacle." By 7 in the morning, security teams were conducting final sweeps of Westminster Abbey. Unlike a typical state occasion, this ceremony would have a more intimate guest list: members of the royal family, senior government officials, Commonwealth representatives, and religious leaders. The decision to keep it relatively small was both practical and symbolic, emphasizing the constitutional rather than ceremonial nature of the day. Catherine's morning routine was carefully choreographed. Her dresser, Natasha Archer, had selected a navy blue coat dress by Alexander McQueen, the same designer who had created her wedding dress. The choice was deliberate, elegant and respectful, but not so formal as to overshadow the significance of Charles's sacrifice. Her jewelry selection had been particularly meaningful. She wore sapphire and diamond earrings that had belonged to Princess Diana, along with the same sapphire engagement ring that had once graced Diana's finger. Around her neck was a delicate diamond necklace that had been a gift from Queen Elizabeth II on her wedding day. As her hair was styled in a low chignon, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her to this moment. Just over a year ago, she had been planning her typical spring schedule of school visits and charity engagements. Now she was preparing to become the youngest queen consort in British history since Alexandra of Denmark in 1863. William's preparation was equally careful. His morning suit had been made by Savile Row tailors who had served the royal family for generations. The weight of his great-grandmother's expectations seemed to rest on his shoulders as he adjusted his tie, the same navy blue silk that had been chosen to complement Catherine's outfit. Their children had remained at school, a decision that had sparked some criticism in the media but which William and Catherine felt was important for maintaining their sense of normalcy. George, as the new heir apparent, would need time to adjust to his changed status gradually rather than being thrust into the spotlight immediately. At precisely 9:30, the family departed Clarence House in a convoy of state vehicles. Charles and Camilla rode in the first car, followed by William and Catherine, then other senior royals including Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and their families. The route to Westminster Abbey was lined with modest crowds, reflecting the mixed emotions many Britons felt about the day's events. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was subdued but charged with historical significance. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had worked closely with constitutional scholars to develop a ceremony that would be legally sound and spiritually meaningful. This was uncharted territory. No British monarch had voluntarily abdicated since Edward VIII in 1936, and that had been under very different circumstances. The service began with traditional hymns and prayers, familiar elements that provided comfort amid the unprecedented nature of the day. Charles entered the Abbey with the same dignity he had shown throughout his reign, though those who knew him well could see the emotion he was working to contain. When the moment came for Charles to formally renounce his titles and powers, his voice was steady but filled with gravitas. I, Charles Philip Arthur George, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of my other realms and territories King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, do hereby renounce and abandon all my royal titles, duties, and prerogatives, and do pass them in their entirety to my son William Arthur Philip Lewis. The legal documents had been prepared weeks in advance by the most senior constitutional lawyers in the country. The abdication required not just Charles's signature, but the formal acceptance of Parliament and the governments of all Commonwealth realms where Charles had served as monarch. Catherine watched as William stepped forward to accept the responsibilities that would transform him from heir to sovereign. His voice, when he spoke the words of acceptance, carried the weight of centuries of tradition. William Arthur Philip Lewis, do solemnly accept the throne and crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of the other realms and territories, and do pledge to serve my peoples according to their respective laws and customs. At that moment, William became King William V, and Catherine became Queen Catherine. There was no physical crown present, that would come at the coronation, but the transfer of power was complete and irrevocable. The immediate aftermath of the ceremony was carefully orchestrated. The new monarch's first act was to sign the accession declaration, formally acknowledging their new roles and responsibilities. This was followed by the singing of "God Save the King," words that many in the congregation were hearing for the first time in their lives. As they processed out of the Abbey, Catherine caught sight of familiar faces in the congregation. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, sat in the third row, their faces showing a mixture of pride and concern that only parents could feel watching their daughter take on such an enormous responsibility. The carriage ride back to Buckingham Palace was their first public appearance as monarchs. The crowds along the route had grown significantly, with people eager to catch a glimpse of their new king and queen. Catherine waved from the carriage window, drawing on years of experience in public appearances but, knowing that from this moment forward, every gesture would be scrutinized as that of a reigning queen rather than a future one. Buckingham Palace awaited their return with all the ceremony appropriate for newly acceded monarchs. The palace staff, led by the Lord Chamberlain, formally welcomed King William V and Queen Catherine to their new home. The same rooms that Catherine had visited as a girlfriend, then fiancée, then princess, were now hers by right as queen. The first constitutional duty came immediately. William had to meet with the Prime Minister to formally accept the seals of office and receive his first briefing as monarch. The red boxes that had been part of Charles's daily routine for over 70 years were now William's responsibility. Catherine's first duty as queen was to receive the wives of Commonwealth High Commissioners, a traditional ceremony that nonetheless carried new weight given her role. These women, many of whom had known her for years as Princess of Wales, now curtsied to her as their queen, a moment that struck Catherine with the full reality of her transformed status. The private moments were equally significant. When they finally had a quiet moment together in the blue drawing room, William and Catherine simply looked at each other in amazement at what they had just experienced. "We did it," Catherine said quietly. "No," William replied, taking her hand. "We began it." The international reaction to the abdication and accession was immediate and largely positive. World leaders sent congratulations, praising both Charles's dignified transition and William and Catherine's readiness to take on their new roles. The ceremony had been broadcast globally, introducing many people to the new British monarchs for the first time. Social media response was particularly interesting, with younger audiences expressing enthusiasm for having monarchs closer to their own age. Catherine's relatability factor, which had served her well as Princess of Wales, was now being viewed through the lens of her role as Queen. That evening, the family gathered for a private dinner at Buckingham Palace. Charles and Camilla, now holding the titles of Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, seemed relieved and proud as they watched William and Catherine navigate their first hours as monarchs. The conversation naturally turned to the future. William's vision for his reign emphasized continuity with innovation, maintaining the traditional values and constitutional role of the monarchy while making it more accessible and relevant to contemporary society. Catherine's role as queen consort would be different from her predecessors. Unlike previous queens who had focused primarily on ceremonial duties and charitable patronage, Catherine intended to use her platform to advocate for specific policy changes, particularly around early childhood development and mental health support. As the evening wound down, Catherine found herself standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking out over the mall where crowds were still gathered despite the late hour. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. From a girl growing up in Berkshire whose parents ran a small business from their kitchen table, she had become Queen of the United Kingdom and 15 other Commonwealth realms. It was a transformation that seemed almost impossible, yet here she stood, ready to serve her new role with the same dedication and grace she had shown throughout her years as a working royal. The abdication ceremony was complete, but, in many ways, it was just the beginning of their story as monarchs. The morning after the abdication ceremony, Catherine woke in the Belgian suite at Buckingham Palace, the same rooms where Queen Elizabeth II had spent her final years. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now sleeping in beds that had belonged to queens who had ruled for decades, while she had been queen for less than 24 hours. The transition from Princess of Wales to Queen had been instant in legal terms, but the practical reality was far more complex. Catherine's first challenge came at breakfast when her new private secretary, Sir Edward Young, presented her with a schedule that looked dramatically different from her previous royal diary. "Your Majesty," he began, the title still sounding strange to Catherine's ears, "we have requests for over 300 patronages to transfer to you from the late Queen Elizabeth. Additionally, there are 47 state visits to be scheduled over the next 18 months, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is requesting an audience to discuss your coronation." William, sitting across from her at the small breakfast table they had requested instead of the formal dining room, looked equally overwhelmed by his own briefing materials. The red boxes that arrived each morning were significantly thicker than what he had received as Prince of Wales, containing state papers, diplomatic cables, and government documents requiring the monarch's attention. Their first joint engagement as monarchs was scheduled for that afternoon, a visit to a children's hospital in London. It would be their first public appearance since the abdication ceremony, and the palace press office was fielding hundreds of media requests for access. Catherine's relationship with her dresser, Natasha Archer, had evolved overnight. Choosing outfits as Princess of Wales had been about looking appropriate and supporting British designers. Now, every choice would be analyzed for symbolic meaning. The soft pink dress coat she selected for the hospital visit was meant to convey warmth and approachability, qualities she hoped to bring to her role as queen. The drive to the hospital revealed the immediate change in public interest. Where once there might have been a small group of royal watchers and local media, now international news crews lined the route. Catherine noticed photographers with telephoto lenses positioned on rooftops, something she had rarely seen during her time as princess. Inside the hospital, the reaction of both staff and patients surprised her. Children who had been shy around the Princess of Wales now seemed almost reverent in the presence of their queen. One 7-year-old girl, recovering from heart surgery, asked if Catherine was really the queen like in the storybooks. "I am," Catherine replied, kneeling to the girl's eye level, "but I'm also a mum, just like yours. And I care about making sure you get better." This interaction, captured by photographers and later shared worldwide, would become emblematic of Catherine's approach to queenship, formal when protocol demanded, but fundamentally human in her connections with people. William's first week included a series of constitutional meetings that highlighted the weight of his new role. The weekly audience with the Prime Minister, which Charles had conducted for just over 2 years, now fell to William. These meetings covered everything from domestic policy to international relations, giving the new king insight into government decision-making at the highest level. His first significant challenge came when a diplomatic crisis erupted with a Commonwealth nation over trade agreements. William found himself in the delicate position of maintaining constitutional neutrality while representing Britain's interests abroad. The experience reinforced how different his role as king would be from his previous position as heir. The children's adjustment to their parents' new status proved more complex than anticipated. George, now second in line to the throne, faced immediate changes at school. His protection officers were increased, and several classmates' parents had requested meetings with teachers about their children's interaction with the future king. Charlotte and Louis, while not directly in the line of succession's immediate focus, nonetheless found their lives transformed. Simple activities like weekend football matches or birthday parties now required security assessments that had previously been minimal. Catherine made the decision to maintain their residence at Adelaide Cottage rather than moving immediately into the state apartments at Buckingham Palace. This choice, while practical for the children's stability, required significant security modifications to the property. One of the most challenging aspects of their first weeks was learning to navigate the complex relationship with media coverage. As Princess of Wales, Catherine had experienced intense scrutiny, but the attention on a reigning queen was qualitatively different. Every public appearance was analyzed not just for fashion choices or body language, but for insights into her approach to constitutional monarchy. The international dimension of their new roles became apparent when President Biden called to congratulate them and requested a state visit at the earliest opportunity. Similar calls came from leaders across the Commonwealth and Europe, each relationship requiring careful diplomatic consideration. Catherine's first solo engagement as queen was a visit to a women's refuge in Manchester, continuing her work on domestic violence awareness but, now with the enhanced platform of the Crown. The visit generated significant media coverage, but also criticism from some quarters who felt the Queen should focus on more traditional charitable causes. This criticism highlighted one of the key tensions Catherine would face throughout her reign, balancing respect for royal tradition with her desire to address contemporary social issues. Her response came in a carefully worded statement emphasizing that supporting vulnerable women was entirely consistent with the monarchy's role of service to all citizens. William's approach to kingship became clearer during his first Privy Council meeting. Unlike his father, who had waited decades to express his views on various issues, William indicated he would be more actively engaged with matters of national importance, while still maintaining constitutional neutrality. The couple's first state dinner, hosting the President of South Korea, provided a glimpse into their vision for modern monarchy. While maintaining all the traditional protocols and pageantry, they included elements that reflected contemporary Britain. The menu featured dishes representing Britain's diverse communities, and the entertainment included both classical music and contemporary performers. Catherine's first major speech as Queen came at a conference on early childhood development. Her words were carefully crafted to establish her priorities while respecting constitutional boundaries. As Queen, I have the privilege of advocating for those who need our support most. Children represent our future, and investing in their earliest years is not just morally right, it's essential for our society's prosperity. The financial aspects of monarchy also required immediate attention. William and Catherine's personal wealth, significant but not extraordinary by royal standards, was now supplemented by the Duchy of Lancaster and other crown resources. Managing these assets while maintaining transparency became a priority for their new household staff. Their relationship with Charles and Camilla during this transition period proved crucial for their success. Charles remained available for advice while being careful not to interfere with his son's decision-making. Camilla, now Dowager Queen, provided Catherine with insights into managing the unique pressures of queenship. The international media's fascination with Catherine as Queen reached fever pitch during their first overseas visit, a brief trip to Ireland to meet with the President and Taoiseach. The symbolism of their first foreign visit being to a neighbor with complex historical ties to Britain was deliberate, emphasizing William's commitment to strengthening relationships across the British Isles. Irish crowds welcomed them warmly, with particular enthusiasm for Catherine. Her ability to connect with people, speaking a few words in Irish Gaelic that she had learned for the occasion, demonstrated her commitment to understanding the diverse cultures within the British sphere of influence. The trip also highlighted security concerns that came with their elevated status. Threats against the royal family had increased following the abdication, requiring enhanced protection measures that sometimes conflicted with their desire to be accessible to the public. Back in London, the practical challenges of running the monarchy became apparent. Buckingham Palace required significant updates to accommodate their working style, which was more hands-on than previous monarchs. Catherine particularly wanted to modernize the palace's approach to charitable work, implementing systems that would allow for more direct impact measurement. Their first month as monarchs concluded with a private family dinner that included Charles and Camilla, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward with their families. The conversation naturally turned to how the monarchy was adapting to its new leadership. "You're both bringing fresh energy to the institution," Princess Anne observed. "But, remember that change must be gradual. The monarchy's strength lies in its continuity." William and Catherine had learned this lesson well. Their approach was evolutionary rather than revolutionary, respecting traditions while carefully introducing innovations that would help the monarchy remain relevant to contemporary society. As they prepared for bed that night in their temporary Buckingham Palace quarters, Catherine reflected on how much their lives had changed in just 4 weeks. The girl who had once been photographed by paparazzi while shopping for groceries was now one of the most recognizable women in the world, her every public moment analyzed by constitutional experts and fashion commentators alike. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked as they reviewed their schedules for the following week. Catherine considered the question seriously. The responsibilities were enormous, the scrutiny intense, and the impact on their children significant. But she also thought about the hospital patients who had lit up at her visit, the women's refuge that would receive increased support because of royal attention, and the platform they now had to address issues they cared deeply about. "No," she said finally. "This is what we trained for, even when we didn't know it. And we're doing it together." Their first weeks as monarchs had been a crash course in the realities of constitutional monarchy in the 21st century. They had learned to balance tradition with innovation, personal desires with public duty, and family life with the demands of the crown. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, but they faced them with the confidence that comes from having successfully navigated their initial weeks as King William V and Queen Catherine. 3 months into their reign, William and Catherine faced their first major test as monarchs, hosting President Emmanuel Macron of France for a state visit that would set the tone for Britain's post-Brexit relationship with Europe. The stakes couldn't have been higher, as diplomatic observers worldwide watched to see how the new monarchs would handle such a delicate political situation. The preparation for the visit revealed the intricate machinery of modern monarchy. Catherine spent weeks working with the Foreign Office and palace officials to craft every detail of the visit, from the menu at the state banquet to the choice of gifts exchanged between the two nations. Her background in art history, once dismissed by critics as an indication of her unsuitability for royal life, now proved invaluable as she selected paintings and artifacts that would subtly reinforce cultural ties between Britain and France. The international media buildup was unprecedented. Never before had so many foreign correspondents requested accreditation for a British state visit. Catherine's every outfit choice was scrutinized not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for its diplomatic messaging. When she chose to wear a tiara that had once belonged to a French princess who married into the British royal family, fashion writers called it diplomatic dressing at its finest. William's role in the visit showcased his evolution as a constitutional monarch. During his private meetings with President Macron, he demonstrated the delicate balance required of a modern king, showing genuine interest in policy discussions while maintaining strict political neutrality. His ability to speak fluent French, refined during his years as heir, allowed for more personal connections that couldn't be achieved through interpreters. The state banquet at Buckingham Palace became a showcase for Catherine's vision of modern royal hospitality. While maintaining all the traditional elements, the horseshoe-shaped table setting, the gold plates from the George IV service, the carefully choreographed toasts, she introduced subtle innovations. The floral arrangements featured English garden roses combined with French lavender, symbolizing the harmony she hoped to foster between the two nations. Catherine's speech at the banquet marked her emergence as a significant diplomatic figure in her own right. Speaking without notes, she delivered remarks in both English and French that demonstrated not just linguistic skill but deep understanding of the cultural connections between the two nations. Her reference to the shared sacrifice of World War I, delivered while wearing a brooch given to Queen Mary by French allies, brought tears to the eyes of several veterans in attendance. The visit's most memorable moment came during a walkabout in Covent Garden, where Catherine's security team had to adapt quickly when an elderly French tourist, in London with her granddaughter, collapsed in the crowd. Rather than being whisked away by security, Catherine personally ensured the woman received medical attention, staying with her until paramedics arrived and speaking to her in French to help calm her fears. The incident, captured by dozens of cameras and shared worldwide, encapsulated Catherine's approach to queenship. Royal protocol experts noted that previous generations of royals would likely have been moved away from such a situation for security reasons. Catherine's decision to stay and help demonstrated her commitment to putting service above self-protection. The international reaction to the state visit was overwhelmingly positive, with diplomatic analysts noting that William and Catherine had successfully launched Britain's soft power offensive for the post-Brexit era. Their combination of respect for tradition with genuine warmth had created exactly the image Britain needed to project to its European neighbours. But the success of the French state visit was immediately overshadowed by a crisis that tested the new monarchs in ways they hadn't anticipated. A terrorist attack in Manchester, targeting a shopping center during busy Saturday afternoon trade, killed 12 people and injured dozens more. William and Catherine's response to this tragedy would define how they were perceived as leaders during times of national trauma. The attack occurred while they were hosting a private lunch for Commonwealth High Commissioners at Windsor Castle. William's private secretary interrupted the meal to brief the king on the developing situation. The immediate challenge was balancing the need to respond quickly with the constitutional requirement that the monarch not appear to be directing government response to the crisis. Catherine's first instinct was to travel immediately to Manchester to comfort victims' families and thank first responders. However, security concerns and the need to coordinate with government officials meant they had to wait until the following day. That evening, they issued a carefully worded statement expressing their shock and sympathy while praising the courage of emergency services. Their visit to Manchester 2 days after the attack showcased their growth as monarchs dealing with national tragedy. William met privately with senior police and intelligence officials, receiving briefings on the investigation and security implications. Catherine focused on visiting hospitals where victims were recovering, demonstrating a remarkable ability to provide comfort while maintaining her own emotional composure. The most poignant moment came when Catherine met with the family of 8-year-old Sophie Chen, who had been killed in the attack while shopping for her school project. Sophie's parents, immigrants from Hong Kong who had built a successful life in Manchester, were devastated but found solace in Catherine's genuine empathy and her promise that their daughter would not be forgotten. Catherine's decision to attend Sophie's funeral the following week, despite security concerns and the precedent it might set, demonstrated her commitment to using her position meaningfully. Her presence at the service, alongside hundreds of community members from Manchester's diverse neighborhoods, sent a powerful message about unity in the face of terror. The international response to how William and Catherine handled the Manchester attack elevated their global profile significantly. World leaders who had initially viewed them as untested newcomers began to see them as mature figures capable of leading Britain through challenging times. This growing international respect was tested again when they undertook their first major overseas tour as monarchs, a 12-day visit to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand that would cover over 20,000 miles and include dozens of engagements across 3 different time zones. The Canadian leg of the tour began in Ottawa, where they were greeted by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and thousands of well-wishers. Catherine's choice to wear a maple leaf brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II while speaking about the importance of Commonwealth ties resonated strongly with Canadian audiences who still valued their constitutional connection to the British Crown. In Toronto, they visited a facility for homeless youth, an issue Catherine had championed since her days as Princess of Wales. Her interaction with 16-year-old Marcus, a young man who had aged out of foster care and found refuge at the center, demonstrated her ability to connect with people facing challenges far removed from royal life. "Your Majesty," Marcus said as she prepared to leave, "you actually listened. Most adults just want to get their picture taken and leave." Catherine's response, "Your voice matters," and "I'll remember what you've told me," was captured by microphones and became one of the defining quotes of the tour. The Australian portion of the visit proved more challenging, as Republican sentiment had grown stronger in recent years. Protests in Sydney were peaceful but vocal, with demonstrators calling for an end to the monarchy's role in Australian governance. William and Catherine's response was pitch perfect. They acknowledged the protesters' right to express their views while focusing on their role as advocates for causes that transcended political divisions. Their visit to a drought-affected farming community in rural New South Wales showcased their understanding of Australia's environmental challenges. William's discussion with farmers about sustainable agriculture practices, informed by his years of environmental advocacy, demonstrated that the monarchy could contribute meaningfully to contemporary policy discussions. Catherine's highlight in Australia came during a visit to a women's shelter in Melbourne, where she met with survivors of domestic violence and the social workers supporting them. Her announcement of a new Royal Foundation initiative to support similar organizations across the Commonwealth generated significant media coverage and reinforced her commitment to using her platform for social change. The New Zealand segment of the tour provided opportunities to engage with Maori communities and learn about Indigenous perspectives on monarchy and governance. Catherine's efforts to learn basic Maori phrases and her respectful participation in traditional ceremonies were well received by Indigenous leaders who had initially been skeptical of the royal visit. Their final engagement of the tour, a reception for young Commonwealth leaders in Auckland, allowed them to articulate their vision for the monarchy's future role. William's speech, delivered without notes, emphasized the monarchy's evolution from an institution of empire to one of voluntary association and shared values. "The Commonwealth is not about the past," he said. "It's about the future we can build together, sharing our experiences and supporting each other in facing common challenges." Catherine's remarks focused on the role of women and young people in shaping that future, drawing on her interactions throughout the tour to illustrate how traditional monarchy could support progressive social change. The tour's success was measured not just in positive media coverage, but in concrete diplomatic outcomes. Trade discussions that had stalled were revived, cultural exchange programs were announced, and several Commonwealth nations expressed renewed interest in strengthening their ties with Britain. Upon their return to London, William and Catherine found that their international profile had been transformed. They were no longer viewed as promising newcomers to the monarchy, but as established global figures whose opinions carried weight on the international stage. The impact extended beyond diplomacy. Catherine's fashion choices during the tour had generated an estimated £20 million in sales for British designers, demonstrating the continued economic power of royal influence. More importantly, her advocacy for women's issues and children's welfare had elevated these causes on government agendas across multiple countries. As they settled back into life at Buckingham Palace, reviewing the tour's successes and planning for future engagements, William and Catherine reflected on how much they had grown as monarchs in just 6 months. They had successfully managed international crises, hosted world leaders, and represented Britain with dignity and effectiveness across 3 continents. The girl who had once been criticized as Waity Katie was now recognized as Queen Catherine, a figure whose influence extended far beyond Britain's borders. Her journey from middle-class commoner to global queen had been completed not through birth or marriage, but through dedication, hard work, and genuine commitment to service. The next phase of their reign would bring new challenges, but they faced the future with confidence earned through successful navigation of their first major tests as monarchs on the world stage. 1 year after their accession, preparations for William and Catherine's coronation reached a crescendo that would culminate in the most watched royal ceremony of the 21st century. Westminster Abbey, the same sacred space that had witnessed their wedding 13 years earlier, would once again serve as the backdrop for a defining moment in their lives, this time as they were formally crowned as Britain's monarchs. The coronation planning had been unlike anything in recent royal history. Where previous coronations had been planned years or even decades in advance, William and Catherine's ceremony had been organized in just 12 months. The challenge was immense, creating an event that honored 1,000 years of tradition while reflecting the values of contemporary Britain and the diverse Commonwealth realms over which they now ruled. Catherine's approach to the coronation reflected her transformation from nervous bride to confident queen. Where she had relied heavily on advisors for her wedding, she now took an active role in planning every aspect of the ceremony. Her decision to invite representatives from women's refuges, homeless shelters, and children's charities to sit alongside world leaders sent a clear message about the kind of monarchy she intended to lead. The coronation dress, created by Sarah Burton at Alexander McQueen, took 8 months to complete. Unlike the elaborate gowns of previous queen consorts, Catherine's dress struck a balance between majesty and accessibility. The ivory silk crepe gown featured hand-embroidered flowers representing all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, along with subtle references to the Commonwealth realms. The overall effect was elegant without being ostentatious, reflecting Catherine's understanding that modern monarchy must be magnificent but not excessive. William's transformation over the year leading to the coronation had been equally remarkable. The prince who had once seemed reluctant to embrace his royal destiny now appeared completely at ease with his role as king. His decision to modernize several aspects of the coronation ceremony, including allowing cameras to capture the entire service rather than just selected moments, demonstrated his commitment to transparency and accessibility. The international guest list for the coronation reflected Britain's position in the modern world. Alongside traditional monarchies and heads of state, William and Catherine invited leaders from emerging democracies, representatives of international charities, and young people who embodied the Commonwealth's future. The decision to seat a group of scholarship recipients from developing nations in prime viewing positions alongside world leaders was vintage Catherine, using royal protocol to highlight causes she cared about. The morning of the coronation dawned bright and clear, a piece of good fortune that seemed to bless the entire enterprise. Catherine woke in the Belgian suite at Buckingham Palace for what would be her final morning as an uncrowned queen. The weight of history pressed down on the day, but she felt ready for what lay ahead. Her preparation involved rituals unchanged for centuries alongside innovations she had requested. The ancient St. Edward's crown, which would be placed on William's head, had been slightly modified to fit him properly. Catherine would wear a new crown created specially for her coronation, incorporating diamonds from Queen Elizabeth II collection with new stones representing the Commonwealth nations. The procession to Westminster Abbey provided the first glimpse of how William and Catherine had modernized royal pageantry. While maintaining the grandeur expected of a coronation, they had chosen a route that would allow maximum public access. The crowds that lined the streets represented the diversity of modern Britain, families from across the Commonwealth, young people who saw the monarchy as relevant to their lives, and elderly citizens for whom the coronation represented continuity with traditions they had cherished throughout their lives. Inside Westminster Abbey, the congregation of 2,500 included faces that told the story of Catherine's remarkable journey. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, sat in places of honor, representing the millions of ordinary families who saw in their daughter's story a reflection of contemporary British possibility. Nearby sat Charles and Camilla, their faces showing pride mixed with relief as they watched the monarchy they had briefly led transition to its next generation. The service itself blended ancient ritual with modern relevance in ways that previous coronations had never attempted. When the Archbishop of Canterbury anointed William with holy oil, the traditional screen that had hidden this most sacred moment from public view was eliminated, symbolizing the transparency William promised to bring to his reign. Catherine's role in the ceremony was expanded beyond that of previous queen consorts. In addition to being crowned alongside her husband, she was formally invested with specific responsibilities for Commonwealth relations and social welfare, roles that reflected her demonstrated competence and passion. The moment when the St. Edward's crown was placed on William's head marked not just his formal coronation, but the culmination of his transformation from reluctant prince to confident king. The weight of the crown, 5 pounds of gold, precious stones, and centuries of history, seemed to settle naturally on his head, as if it had always belonged there. Catherine's coronation followed immediately, with the new Queen Catherine crown glittering under the abbey's lights as it was placed on her head by the Archbishop. The crown's design incorporated diamonds in patterns representing education and opportunity, symbols of Catherine's personal journey and her vision for the monarchy's role in promoting social mobility. The congregation's response to "God Save the King" was thunderous, but it was the playing of a new piece commissioned specially for the occasion, a Commonwealth blessing, composed by a young musician from Jamaica, that truly captured the spirit of this new reign. The music blended traditional British orchestral elements with influences from across the Commonwealth, creating something that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The coronation banquet at Buckingham Palace that evening provided the first opportunity to see how William and Catherine would handle state entertaining as crowned monarchs. Rather than the traditional formal dinner, they hosted a reception that mixed world leaders with representatives from charities, schools, and community organizations they had supported throughout their first year as monarchs. Catherine's speech at the banquet demonstrated how completely she had grown into her role as queen. Speaking without notes to an audience that included presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs from around the world, she articulated a vision of monarchy that was both ambitious and humble. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a coronation, but a commitment," she said. "A commitment to serve not just our own people, but to work with leaders across the Commonwealth and beyond to address the challenges that face us all. The crown is not a prize to be won, but a responsibility to be carried with humility and determination." The international reaction to the coronation exceeded all expectations. An estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide watched the ceremony, making it the most-watched royal event in history. More importantly, the coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting how successfully William and Catherine had managed to honor tradition while making the monarchy relevant to contemporary audiences. The economic impact was substantial as well. The coronation generated an estimated £1.2 billion in economic activity, from tourism to retail sales of commemorative items. British designers featured in Catherine's wardrobe saw immediate increases in international orders, demonstrating the continued commercial power of royal influence. But the true measure of the coronation's success came in the weeks that followed, as William and Catherine embarked on their first post-coronation tour of the United Kingdom. The enthusiasm of the crowds, the warmth of their reception, and the genuine affection displayed by people across all four nations of the UK demonstrated that they had successfully connected with their subjects in ways that transcended mere ceremony. Their visit to a comprehensive school in Birmingham highlighted Catherine's continued commitment to education and opportunity. When 15-year-old Aliyah Patel asked the Queen what advice she had for young people from immigrant families who wanted to serve their communities, Catherine's response was both personal and inspiring. "I want you to know that in modern Britain, your background doesn't limit your potential," she said. "What matters is your willingness to work hard and your commitment to helping others. The fact that you're asking this question shows you already understand what real service means." The moment was captured by cameras and shared worldwide, becoming symbolic of Catherine's approach to queenship, using her position to encourage and inspire rather than simply to be admired. William's evolution was equally evident during the tour. His engagement with young entrepreneurs in Scotland, his discussions with farmers in Wales about sustainable agriculture, and his meetings with community leaders in Northern Ireland all demonstrated a king who was genuinely engaged with the challenges facing his realms. By the end of their first year as crowned monarchs, William and Catherine had established themselves as figures who commanded respect both at home and abroad. Public approval ratings for the monarchy reached levels not seen since the early years of Elizabeth II's reign, with particular enthusiasm among younger demographics who had previously shown little interest in royal activities. Catherine's personal transformation was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their first year as crowned monarchs. The shy university student who had once hidden from photographers was now one of the most photographed women in the world, but on her own terms. She had learned to use media attention strategically, ensuring that coverage of her activities highlighted the causes she supported rather than simply her personal life. Her establishment of the Queen Catherine Foundation, focused on early childhood development and family support, demonstrated how she intended to use her platform for lasting social change. The Foundation's first major initiative, a comprehensive study of child development in disadvantaged communities, attracted support from governments and organizations worldwide. William's approach to kingship had also matured significantly. His weekly audiences with the Prime Minister had evolved from ceremonial meetings to substantive discussions where his knowledge and perspective were genuinely valued by government officials. His ability to remain constitutionally neutral while still being a voice for national unity had been tested through several political crises and proven effective. The couple's children had adjusted well to their changed circumstances, though not without challenges. George, now clearly established as the heir apparent, showed remarkable maturity in handling the increased attention his status brought. Charlotte and Louis continued to attend their local school, with security arrangements that allowed them to maintain friendships and normal childhood activities. As they reflected on their first year as crowned monarchs, William and Catherine could point to substantial achievements. They had successfully hosted world leaders, managed international crises, and represented Britain with distinction across multiple continents. More importantly, they had demonstrated that constitutional monarchy could evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character. Catherine's journey from Lady Katie to Queen Catherine was complete, but her story was far from over. At just 42 years old, she faced the prospect of potentially decades as queen, with the opportunity to shape not just the monarchy's future but Britain's place in the world. The girl from Berkshire who had once been told she wasn't suitable for a prince had become a queen who commanded global respect and admiration. Her story represented the best of contemporary Britain, a society where talent and dedication could overcome any barrier of birth or background. As she stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony following their coronation, waving to crowds that stretched as far as she could see, Catherine embodied the transformation of the British monarchy itself. Ancient in its traditions but modern in its aspirations, confident in its purpose but humble in its service, ready to face whatever challenges the 21st century might bring. The coronation was over, but the reign of William V and Catherine had truly begun. Their first appearance as crowned monarchs had stunned the globe not through pageantry alone, but through their demonstration that constitutional monarchy remained relevant, vital, and capable of inspiring people across the world to believe in the possibility of service, duty, and positive change.